I never imagined that cleaning could turn my world upside down, but that's exactly what happened when I found the letter. My name is Hope, and until last Tuesday, I was just another 17-year-old trying to survive senior year, carefully navigating my mother and stepfather's endless rules. I wasn't supposed to be in Derek's study. That room was strictly forbidden. But Mom had been nagging me about doing more around the house. "If you want college money, you need to show some initiative," she'd said that morning, her voice coated in that all-too-familiar passive-aggressive sweetness. So there I was, dusting his prized mahogany desk, when an envelope slipped out from between two books. The paper felt heavy, expensive, official. A law firm's letterhead stared back at me. I should have put it back. I really should have. But something made me unfold it. Maybe it was the way Jason had been watching me lately, like he was just waiting for me to mess up. Or maybe it was because at the top of the page I saw a name I hadn't expected. My father's. My hands trembled as I read. Words leaped off the page. Trust fund, substantial inheritance, monthly disbursements. My breath caught in my throat. According to this letter, I should have been receiving money since I turned 16, money my father had set aside just for me. But I hadn't seen a single cent. "What are you doing in here?" I flinched at my mother's voice, nearly dropping the letter. She stood in the doorway, one manicured hand gripping the frame. For a split second, her gaze flickered to the paper in my hands, and in that moment, I saw something I'd never seen before. Fear. "Mom, what is this?" My voice came out hoarse as I held up the letter. "Did Dad leave me money?" "Give me that." She crossed the room in 3 swift strides, snatching the letter from my grasp. "You shouldn't be snooping through private documents." "Private? That letter has my name on it. It's about my inheritance." She let out a sharp, humorless laugh. "Oh, sweetie, you don't understand how these things work. Your father left us in a mess. I had no choice but to use that money to keep us afloat to give you a good life." "Us?" My stomach twisted. "The letter says it's mine for my education, my future." Her expression hardened. "And who do you think has been paying for this house? Your clothes? That phone in your pocket?" Her voice dropped, each word laced with warning. "I am your mother. I decide what's best for this family." I felt like the floor had been ripped out from under me. Every time she'd complained about money, every tutoring session she refused, every art class she said we couldn't afford it had all been a lie. "Does Grandma Eleanor know about this?" Something in her face shifted. Just for a moment. "Leave your grandmother out of this." Her grip tightened on the letter. "And if you know what's good for you, you'll forget you ever saw it." She turned toward the door, then paused. "Oh, and Hope? You're grounded for being in Derek's study without permission." I watched my mother walk away, my father's letter clutched in her manicured hand, and I knew nothing would ever be the same again. Being grounded meant I couldn't visit Grandma Eleanor, but Mom had overlooked one small detail: my weekly tutoring sessions. That's how, 3 days later, I found myself sitting in Grandma's warm kitchen, my untouched tea growing cold as I laid everything out: the letter, the trust fund, the money I never knew existed. The usual comforting scent of cinnamon and vanilla filled the air, but for the first time, it did nothing to settle my nerves. I watched her face carefully as I spoke, noticing how she wouldn't quite meet my eyes. When I finished, she just sat there, twisting her wedding ring, a nervous habit I'd seen 1,000 times before. "You knew, didn't you?" My voice was quiet, but I already knew the answer. Grandma Eleanor sighed, finally looking at me. "Your mother made me promise not to tell you. She said it would only hurt you to know about the money when there wasn't any left." "But it wasn't hers to spend," my voice cracked. "Dad left it for me for college." "I know, sweetheart." She reached across the table, squeezing my hand. "That's why I've been putting money aside for you ever since she told me what she was doing. It's not much, but—" "Wait," I interrupted, my stomach twisting. "How long has this been going on?" Since before Jason? She hesitated. Then, without a word, she stood and walked to a cabinet I'd never seen her open before. My pulse quickened. There's something else you should know. She returned with a small, time-worn box and placed it in front of me. I lifted the lid, my breath catching as I took in the dozens of letters, cards, even faded photographs. These are from your father's parents, George and Margaret. They've been trying to contact you for years. My heart slammed against my ribs. What? Mom told me they wanted nothing to do with us after Dad died. Grandma's lips pressed into a tight line. They write to you every birthday, every Christmas, your mother. She trailed off, but I didn't need her to finish. I already knew. More lies, more secrets. My hands shook as I picked up an envelope, the ink slightly smudged from time. Why are you telling me this now? Her voice was steady, but her eyes burned with something I'd never seen before. Because I'm done watching your mother control your life the way she controlled your father's. I swallowed hard. George and Margaret are good people. They loved your father and they want to know their granddaughter. I opened the letter in my hands, revealing a crisp card and a check inside a graduation present, though graduation was still months away. My breath caught at the amount. They live less than an hour from here, Grandma said softly. I can arrange a meeting if you want. Before I could answer, my phone buzzed. Mom. Where are you? Tutoring ended 20 minutes ago. I felt the moment slip away. Grandma saw my expression darken. Go, she said, already gathering the letters. Take these with you, but hide them well. As I stood, she caught my arm. And Hope? Her voice softened. Whatever you decide, I'm on your side this time. I should have been all along. I hugged her tightly, feeling the weight of the letters in my backpack like a secret weapon. Mom and Jason had no idea what was coming. And for the first time since finding that letter in Derek's study, I felt something other than anger, something beyond betrayal. I felt hope. Meeting my father's parents felt unreal. Grandma Eleanor had arranged everything, sending me to a quiet cafe 2 towns over where Mom and Jason wouldn't accidentally run into us. The moment I stepped inside, my heart pounded against my ribs. I almost didn't recognize them until I met Margaret's gaze. My gaze. Hope, she whispered, standing so quickly she nearly knocked over the table. George steadied her coffee cup, his weathered hands trembling slightly. They both looked older than in their photos, but their faces were warm, open, hopeful. We've waited so long for this, George said, pulling out a chair for me. I sat down, my throat tight. I just found out about the letters last week. I'm sorry I never... Don't apologize, Margaret interrupted, reaching across the table but hesitating before touching my hand. We know exactly who kept them from you. George cleared his throat and pulled a thick folder from his bag. We've been documenting everything since your father passed the trust fund, the house deed, the bank withdrawals. He spread several papers in front of me. This house, the one you live in now, your father bought it for you specifically. It was meant to be yours when you turned 18. The words hit like a punch. What? My coffee turned bitter in my mouth. Margaret's lips thinned. Your mother was only supposed to be the trustee. She convinced the court she needed to live there to take care of you, George added, his expression darkening. But the deed should have transferred to you next year. My father's signature was there, bold and undeniable at the bottom of the document. She and Jason are talking about selling it, I murmured, my mind spinning. George and Margaret exchanged a glance. They can't, George said firmly. Not legally, but they've been trying to find ways around the trust requirements for years. The weight of everything pressed down on me, my inheritance, the house, the stolen years of family I never knew I had. My mother had built an entire life on deception, and for the first time, I had the proof to unravel it all. I looked up at my grandparents. I don't know what to do. Margaret's eyes softened. You don't have to figure it all out today, but whatever you decide, you won't be alone. For the first time in a long time, I believed it. Is that why you never visited? My voice was barely above a whisper. Because of Mom? Margaret's eyes filled with unshed tears. She threatened to get a restraining order if we tried to contact you. Said we were harassing her, poisoning you against her. We didn't want to risk losing every chance of seeing you, but Mara, we never stopped trying. George slid an envelope across the table. This is yours. We've been saving for you, separate from the trust fund for college or whatever you need. I hesitated before opening it, and when I did, my breath hitched. The check inside had more zeros than I'd ever seen. My fingers trembled as I tried to hand it back. I can't take this. Margaret's grip was surprisingly strong as she gently pushed my hands away. Keep it. Hide it somewhere safe. Her voice softened. And Mara, if you want to fight this, we can help. We have lawyers, documentation, everything needed to protect your inheritance, but it has to be your choice. My phone buzzed. Mom. Again. Looking up at my grandparents, I saw the same features I'd studied in old photos of my father, the same ones I glimpsed in my own reflection. For the first time, I wasn't alone in this fight. I took a slow breath, then turned off my phone. Tell me everything. Sleep was impossible that night. My mind refused to shut off, replaying every lie, every stolen year. So I did the only thing I could. I called Sarah. She picked up on the first ring. Your house? She whispered, stunned. Are you serious? I sat on my bedroom floor, the deed George had copied for me clutched in my lap. Everything's been a lie, Sarah. The money, the house, even my grandparents. Have you heard your mom and Derek talking about selling yet? No, but... I stopped. Voices drifted up from downstairs. Derek's voice. Angry. I crept to my door, easing it open just enough to hear. We need to move fast, Derek snapped. If she's been talking to Eleanor, she hasn't, Mom interrupted. I've been monitoring her phone. My stomach dropped. I clutched my burner phone tighter. They didn't know. The realtor needs an answer by Friday, Jason pressed. And we need that money before the audit. My heart nearly stopped. What audit? I whispered into the phone. Mira? Sarah's voice sharpened. What's happening? I strained to hear, every word sending my pulse racing. Offshore accounts, paper trail, clean break. Each phrase made my chest tighten. I whispered, I can't wait any longer. If they sell this house, then don't wait, Sarah cut in. Come stay with me. My parents already said you can. But I knew I couldn't. Not yet. I need proof. My voice was steady. George and Margaret said they'll help, but I have to be smart about this. Footsteps. I barely had time to scramble back into bed before my door creaked open. Mom's shadow filled the doorway. Mara, are you awake? I forced my breathing to stay slow. Steady. She lingered. Watching. Waiting. Finally, she turned and shut the door. The next morning, my laptop was gone. It's being repaired, Mom said over breakfast. The screen was cracking. It wasn't. Then she touched my shoulder. Oh, and honey, I scheduled extra tutoring sessions for you every day this week, to keep me away from Grandma Eleanor. I forced a smile. Thanks, Mom. That's really thoughtful. Her answering smile didn't reach her eyes. We stood there, two liars pretending everything was fine. But we both knew the truth. Later, I texted Sarah from my secret phone. They're closing in. I need to move faster. Her reply was instant. Whatever you need, I'm with you. I looked at my house as I walked to school. One way or another, this would end soon. Friday wasn't just a deadline. It was tomorrow. I had no time left. With Mom watching my every move, I had to take a risk. That's how I ended up in the attic at 3 a.m., my phone's flashlight cutting through the dust-filled air. The floorboards groaned under my weight as I moved between stacks of forgotten junk. Old clothes, Christmas decorations, yearbooks, nothing. Then I saw a trunk, its worn leather scratched with a name I knew too well. My father's. I dropped to my knees, heart hammering. The lock was old, but the key George had given me fit perfectly. The lid creaked open. Layers of papers, photographs, then something else. A leather-bound journal. My fingers hovered over it, barely breathing. This was it, the missing piece, the proof I needed. I reached for it, my hands steady for the first time in days. And then footsteps, right outside the attic door. My hands trembled as I opened the journal, scanning the faded ink as quickly as I could. But before I could process what I was reading, a noise downstairs made me freeze. Footsteps. They were heading for the attic stairs. I barely had time to snap photos of the journal pages before I shoved everything back into the trunk, locked it, and slipped behind a stack of boxes. My heart pounded so loudly I was sure they could hear it. The attic door creaked open. "I'm telling you, I heard something," Jason muttered. "It's probably just the house settling," Mom snapped, irritation lacing her voice. "Come back to bed. After what the lawyer said today, we can't take chances." My breath caught. "What lawyer?" Jason exhaled sharply. "She's 17, Ashley. She doesn't know anything." "Your mother's been helping her," he countered. "I saw them together yesterday." "What?" Mom's voice turned sharp. "You said you were handling the surveillance." "I was," Jason hissed. "But your daughter is smarter than you think." The twisted praise made my stomach turn. Their footsteps retreated, but I didn't dare move for another 20 minutes. When I finally made it back to my room, my phone buzzed. A message from George. "Emergency. Call now." I slipped into my closet, buried myself under hanging clothes, and dialed. "What's wrong?" "Jason just filed paperwork to sell the house," George said, his voice tense. "They're closing Monday morning." Ice flooded my veins. "But they can't." "They found a loophole. Ashley's lawyer is arguing that since you're a minor, she has the right to act in your best interest. Once the house sells, the money will be gone forever." My mind raced. The journal. The conversation I'd overheard. What do we do? "We can file an injunction, but we need proof of fraud, something that shows they knew about your inheritance and deliberately hid it." I closed my eyes, the memory of Jason and Mom's hushed voices still fresh. I might have something better. They're meeting a lawyer tomorrow. If I could record them. "Mira, that's dangerous. If they catch you." "They're stealing my future," I whispered. "I have to try." After hanging up, I sat in the dark closet, surrounded by clothes bought with my father's stolen money, in a house that should have been mine, and made my decision. Tomorrow, one way or another, this would end. I just hoped I was ready for the fallout. The recording played through George's laptop speakers, filling the room with my mother's voice. "Once we sell, we'll transfer everything offshore. Mia won't be able to touch it." I had hidden my phone in Jason's study during their meeting with the lawyer. They admitted to everything: the fraud, the stolen inheritance, even their plans to leave the country. George's expression was grim. "This is exactly what we needed." He reached for his phone. "I'll call our lawyer." The front door burst open. Jason stood in the doorway, Mom right behind him. Their faces were twisted with rage. My heart stopped. They must have followed me. "You stupid, ungrateful child," Mom spat as she stormed toward me. "After everything we've done for you." "Everything you've done?" I shot to my feet, shaking but refusing to back down. "You mean stealing my inheritance? Lying about my grandparents? Selling my house?" Jason let out a dark chuckle. "Your house?" His eyes gleamed with something dangerous. "You're a minor. You have nothing." George held up the phone. "She has this, and tomorrow the courts will have it too." Mom's face drained of color. "Give me that phone." George's voice was calm but firm. "It's over, Ashley. You've lost." Then everything happened at once. Jason lunged. George tried to block him. A struggle, a sickening crash. George fell, clutching his chest. "Grandpa!" I dropped to my knees. "Are you okay?" he gasped. The recording? But Jason already had the phone. He smirked. Looking for this? Then, with deliberate cruelty, he dropped it into a glass of water. Oops. I clenched my fists. It doesn't matter, I said, forcing my voice to stay steady. I already sent copies. The slap came out of nowhere. Pain exploded across my cheek, her ring cutting my skin. You ungrateful little liar, Mom hissed. You're just like your father, always trying to ruin everything. Ma'am, step away from her. A police officer stood in the doorway, his hand resting on his weapon. Behind him, paramedics rushed to George. Mom's expression shifted in an instant. Officer, thank goodness. She softened her voice, playing the concerned mother. My daughter is having some kind of breakdown. She's been making wild accusations. Save it, Margaret snapped, holding up her phone. I recorded everything that just happened. Mom's mask cracked. For the first time, real fear flickered in her eyes. But as the paramedics loaded George into the ambulance, my chest tightened. This wasn't the victory I had wanted. My grandfather was hurt. My mother, the woman who was supposed to love and protect me, had struck me. Even with all the evidence, there was still no guarantee we could stop the sale in time. I watched the ambulance drive away, touching my stinging cheek. Was justice worth everything it was costing me? The hospital waiting room felt like limbo. George was stable, but unconscious. The police had taken Mom and Jason in for questioning, but I knew this wasn't over yet. I sat there, gripping Margaret's hand, my mind replaying every moment, every risk, every sacrifice. Then, the doors opened. Jason's lawyer stepped inside. I stood up, my pulse racing. Miss Hope, he said smoothly, adjusting his tie. We need to talk. Miss Langston? The lawyer's voice wavered slightly. Your mother and stepfather would like to speak with you privately. Margaret squeezed my hand. You don't have to. But I did. I followed him to a small conference room where Mom and Jason sat, their expressions hollow, defeated. The lawyer closed the door, leaving us alone. Mom broke the silence first. The police found my journal, she said quietly, her hands folded on the table, the one where I documented everything about the inheritance. My throat tightened. Why? My voice cracked. Why did you take everything he left me? Her expression hardened. Because he left me nothing. She slammed her hand against the table, making me jump. Your father, my husband, left everything to you. The house, the money, everything. Like I meant nothing to him. That's not true, I whispered. The letters in the attic. Mom's brow furrowed. What letters? I reached into my bag, pulling out the journal I had photographed in the attic. Dad wrote to you every day he was sick. He told you how much he loved you, how he wanted to protect both of us. The house wasn't just for me, it was for you too. He made you trustee so you'd always have a home. Her hands trembled as she flipped through the pages. Jason shifted uncomfortably. I never saw these, she murmured. They were in the attic, I said softly. In his trunk, the one you never opened. Jason shot to his feet, his patience unraveling. This is all very touching, but it doesn't change anything. The house sells Monday. A knock at the door cut through the tension. The lawyer stepped back in, his expression unreadable. Actually, he said, the sale has been stopped. The police found evidence of fraud, and with George's statement, my breath hitched. George is awake? I started to stand, but Jason's expression stopped me cold. His jaw clenched as he turned to Mom. This is your fault, he spat. You couldn't just let it go, could you? You had to keep the guilt locked away in some attic. Don't, Mom warned, but Jason wasn't listening anymore. His voice was a growl, venomous and raw. I did everything right. Managed the money, handled the lawyers. But you couldn't stop obsessing over him even dead. He's still between us. The truth slammed into me like a wave. It was you, I whispered, my heart pounding. You kept the letters from her. You made her think Dad abandoned her. Jason's face went blank. Mom turned to him slowly. "Tell me she's wrong," she demanded. He said nothing. That silence was all the answer she needed. Her voice, when it came, was steady. "Get out." Jason scoffed, rolling his eyes. "Get out," she said again, louder this time, her voice sharp with something I hadn't heard in years. Authority. He hesitated, then turned and stormed out. For a long moment, Mom and I sat in silence. Finally, she spoke. "I can't undo what I did," she admitted, "but maybe we can try to fix it together." I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw something I hadn't seen in years. My mother. Broken, but real. I swallowed hard and nodded. "I'd like that." Then I took a breath. "But first, there's someone you need to talk to." We walked to George's hospital room together, ready to begin again. I stood in the attic of my father's house, my house sorting through the last of Jason's belongings. He had taken a plea deal, admitting to fraud and document theft. Mom had filed for divorce the same day. "Found another box of papers?" Layla called from behind a stack of boxes. She'd been helping me clean every weekend since I moved back in. "Want me to add it to the shred pile?" I hesitated. "Let me check first." I had learned not to throw away anything without looking through it first. That was how I had found the rest of Dad's letters last month. The doorbell rang. "That's probably your mom," Layla said quietly. Our weekly dinners had started as awkward, silent affairs at George and Margaret's house, but slowly, something had begun to heal. Mom was in therapy now, working through her grief and guilt. Last week, she had finally asked to see Dad's letters. I dusted off my jeans. "I'll get it. Can you box up the rest of this stuff for Goodwill?" Mom stood on the porch, holding a familiar leather-bound book. "I found this in my storage unit," she said, handing it to me. "It's your father's journal from his last year." My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside, in Dad's familiar handwriting, were entries addressed to me. "He knew," Mom said softly. "He knew he wouldn't see you grow up. So he wrote everything he wanted to tell you about life, love, forgiveness." She hesitated. "I should have given it to you years ago." I looked up. "Why now?" Mom's eyes shone with something I couldn't quite name. "Because you're graduating next week. Because you're becoming the woman he always knew you'd be." She reached out, her fingers brushing the faint scar on my cheek, one of the last reminders of who she had been. Because I want to do better. Later that night, after everyone had left, I sat in Dad's old study, my study now, and read his final words to me. One entry caught my eye. "My dearest Mira, remember that the greatest act of love isn't holding on. It's knowing when to let go and when to forgive. Your mother will struggle without me. Be patient with her. And when the time comes, help her find her way back to herself. Back to you. All my love, Dad." I closed the journal, my chest tight. I thought about revenge and justice, about forgiveness and healing. The inheritance had never really been about the money or the house. It was about legacy. Not just what Dad left behind, but what we chose to do with it. Tomorrow, Mom would come over to help plant Dad's favorite flowers in the garden. George and Margaret would bring lunch. Grandma Eleanor would probably show up with too many desserts. And somewhere, I like to think, Dad would be watching, knowing his final wish had come true. His family was whole again.